This man suffered from serious urethritis, and he could only squeeze out a few drops with all his strength. Urine comes when you sleep. He went downstairs with his crotch covered and rushed to the thatched cottage outside, but before he insisted on going to the toilet, he couldn't hold it back, and the pain was like thousands of knives scraping and stabbing his urethra. When he finished urinating, Paul had collapsed to the ground, and the pain would torture him. And the prison under his jurisdiction sent a very troublesome death penalty prisoner. He was extremely strong, just like a monster, and all prison guards were not moving well, because such people might not be able to control themselves. However, what was annoying was that there was an official second-generation prison guard who didn't know the greatness of heaven and earth. The dead came, the dead came. Paul was very unhappy because he knew that the death penalty prisoners needed to be appeased and could not be stimulated, otherwise it would be very dangerous. And he will give the death penalty prisoners absolute respect and care. He asked Guan Er Dai to shut up. At this time, he looked up at the prisoner. It was strange that this tough and burly giant had a childlike shyness and nervousness on his face. He said his name was John Kefi, and asked Paul if he would turn off the light when he slept at night, because he was afraid of the dark. He also stretched out his palm to shake hands with Paul, which was not like a murderer at all. But at the moment of closing the door, Paul found that the big man had burst into tears. "There's nothing I can do, sir. I want to save them, but it's too late." He was very curious about why such a gentle person would be sentenced to death. "I didn't know. I was surprised to see that he actually killed 2 little girls. When people found them, he was holding the little girl covered in blood and lost his voice in pain. People decided that he was the murderer and arrested him. Is Kofei really a murderer?" Only Paul in the prison is still skeptical about this result, because Paul is a good man, and he has heartfelt observation and respect for everyone's nature. Soon, a death row prisoner was about to be electrocuted, and the prison guards shaved the hair on his head, because it was convenient for the electric actuator. Before the execution, Paul talked with him, and listening to him recall the happiest things in his life was his last companionship. After the power is turned on, they put a soap sponge on their head, because this can ensure that the current can quickly run through the body. Even though Paul gave him psychological counseling before the execution, the man is still panting after sitting on the power. Yes, who is not nervous about death? When the clock on the wall points to 12 o'clock, the old prison guard set off the switch. The prisoner was struggling in bursts of white smoke. Afterwards, the second generation of officials insulted and laughed at the body. Then he was severely reprimanded by another prison guard. Although he had a strong background, some of the bottom lines were still untouchable. The next day, there was a real pervert in the prison. He had a dementia on his face, and he only knew Abba. Abba even asked someone to help wear autumn pants. Slowly, everyone relaxed their vigilance. Only Kofei reminded Paul that it was dangerous. Sure enough, this pervert was pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger. At the moment of entering the door, he attacked the warning of escorting him. Paul rushed the normally arrogant Guan Er Dai, who stepped forward to stop but was kicked in the crotch by a pervert, was scared and couldn't move. Fortunately, another prison guard who came later immediately grabbed the baton in Guan Er Dai's hand and knocked the pervert out. After everyone left, Paul couldn't bear double pain and collapsed directly.
The black man in the prison grabbed the collar of the prison policeman, and his hand was still touching the crotch of the prison policeman. When everyone thought he was going to give a murder warning, but at this time, the lights in the prison suddenly flashed on, and then there was the sound of the light bulb bursting. After everything calmed down, he released Paul. Something more strange came. Kofei sat by the bed and coughed violently, and he looked up. A mass of black worms. The sun flew out of his mouth. The prison policeman said, "What you did to me." Kofei said, "I helped you and I cured you of your disease." Kofei then said, "I'm so tired, very tired," and then lay down and fell asleep. Paul came to the toilet with doubts. The long-lost sense of smoothness confirmed Kofei's words that his urethritis was really better. To thank Kofei, Paul's wife also made some cornbread for him to eat. What magic does Kofei have, and is he really a murderer? Unfortunately, even Kofei's defense lawyer is a racist who hates blacks. Paul can't find the truth, let alone uphold justice, so he has to go back to prison to face the human evil.
The new abnormal death row inmates are dishonest when they go to prison, and they fool the prison guards in different ways every day. Spit at Paul and urinate at the prison guard. The prison guard rushed at him with a high-pressure water gun, and then put him in the confinement room. However, the next day, he sprayed the long-lasting chocolate on the prison guard's face. Not only is the death penalty prisoner so bad, but the warning outside the cell is also very bad. When he is free every day, this second generation of officials will bully the death row prisoners in the prison to show his status. But it was a little comforting that day when he had just bullied the prisoner. The pervert in the cell clamped his neck while the second generation of the official was not paying attention, then kissed him with his mouth and stroked him again. He also flirted with him in extremely shameful language. After the pervert completely released the second generation of the official, he found that he actually peed in his pants. It turned out that he was a complete coward. The death row inmate who had just been bullied by him also laughed loudly at this time, but as the saying goes, it is the act of shooting the head bird that makes the death row inmate completely point at him. One of the pets of the death row inmate is a little mouse. He is particularly cute, as if he is wise, and runs around with a roller all day. That day, he asked the prison guards to help him settle the little mouse and send him to the animal university or the circus after he is executed. This is also the last remaining tenderness of this condemned prisoner. But then the little mouse ran outside the cell. It was the damned second generation of Guan who trampled it to death again. The condemned prisoner cried out in despair. He saw the second generation of Guan sneer and walk away. Looking at the mice on the ground, everyone fell silent. At this time, Coffee shot again. Coffee said it was okay to give it to me and live. Paul carefully picked up the mouse and handed it to him. Coffee held the mouse in his hand and the light flashed and brightened again. At this time, a tail slowly swung from the crack of his hand like a miracle, and then a larger group of flying insects spit out from the mouth of the Coffee. The mouse really lived. All 4 prison guards witnessed the green mirror. Afterwards, Paul caught Guan Er Dai and severely threatened him that he would finish the last execution. I want you to get out of here forever. Unfortunately, the person who is about to be electrocuted is the Frenchman who was trampled to death. He handed the miraculously survived mouse to Coffee and slowly walked to the execution ground, but the kind-hearted person can't think how vicious the devil can do. According to the convention, a wet sponge should be placed on the head of the death penalty prisoner, because the wet sponge can make the current penetrate the prisoner's nervous system faster, so that the prisoner's death is not so painful, but the villain is really too bad. The official second generation cheated on the sponge, and he deliberately didn't wet the sponge. When the current on this side was released, the Frenchman on that side was not electrocuted directly at all, but cried out in pain, the fire penetrated his body, and the room smelled everywhere. Everyone present began to get flustered, including the abnormal and timid second generation of officials. Finally, the French were burned alive. The smell of charred bodies in the air made people who cared vomit more than ever. Colleagues' cruelty to the second generation of officials has also reached the peak, and they can't punish him yet. How will the world punish such a villain? And Coffee was also suffering. He could feel the pain of the French. When everything was solved, Paul took his wife to the prison governor's house as a guest. The warden's wife was dying of illness, and his eyes were sunken, but it was not bad. The warden said that the brain tumor made him feel like he had been poisoned. Sometimes he would make a difference, and he would scold extremely ugly dirty words. Looking at his painful friend, Paul had a bold idea. He wanted Coffee to save the warden's wife. They managed to make the pervert drink the drink with sleeping pills, and then wrapped the official second generation in a sack and locked him in the confinement room. Although everyone didn't say anything, Coffee already knew that he was going to save a woman, but just as everyone passed the abnormal prison door, suddenly Coffee's arm was caught by the abnormal death row prisoner. At this time, Coffee was shocked and he seemed to feel something. Coffee said, "You're a bad guy." The pervert said, "Yes, I'm scum." Finally, the effect of metamorphosis finally began to appear. After successfully getting out of prison, Coffee showed a naive smile. A star in the sky and a handful of fallen leaves on the ground could make him happy like a child. At this time, they had completely trusted Coffee and didn't even put handcuffs on him. Coffee was also completely gentle and had no intention to resist or escape. He followed Paul to the warden's house. At this time, the warden's wife really cursed madly, all of which were all kinds of ugly and inaudible words. Coffee came to the woman. The woman looked terrible, and he was like being possessed by an evil spirit. Coffee just sat quietly in front of the woman. The woman looked at him, and his face was full of panic. Coffee spoke to him gently and smiled, and then lowered his head slowly close to him. Although his husband was beside him, he could only remain silent. Suddenly, the light in the room quickly brightened, and white lights came out of the woman's mouth. All of them were sucked into her body by Coffee. Then the wall clock burst, and the whole room shook, and the miracle happened again. The woman turned out to be slowly sick, and her face had recovered its previous blood color, but this time Coffee just coughed crazily, but he didn't vomit the bugs in his mouth directly. The prison guards slapped him hard, but it was still useless, as if he had been choked by the disease. Coffee returned to prison exhausted. Saving people this time hurt Coffee a lot. He behaved very uncomfortable. The prison guards also opened the cell and released the second generation of officials. Paul said that you should accept the punishment of killing the Frenchman like this. The villain provoked again and said, "Wait, you are all finished." But he was caught by Coffee in the cell before he took a few steps. It was too late for everyone to stop him. He opened his mouth directly and sent all the sick flying insects that didn't spit out into the mouth of Guan Er Dai. Later, Guan Er Dai, who was filled with flying insects, stood up dementia and walked straight forward as if he had lost his soul. Unexpectedly, when passing by the abnormal cell, the abnormal person who woke up really provoked again, so Guan Er Dai didn't hesitate to pull out his pistol and kill the abnormal person. When the warning subdued it, a pile of flying insects slowly emerged from his mouth and disappeared into the air. Paul couldn't believe the scene in front of him. He questioned Coffee why he did this, but Coffee said he just punished the bad guys. Then he cried and asked Paul to hold his hand, so that Paul could see the pervert with the clasp of both hands. Coffee passed on some of his abilities to Paul. So a cruel past clearly appeared in his mind. It turned out that the 2 girls Coffee held that year, he really didn't kill it. The real killer is this pervert. He killed the poor little girl. But what's more evil is that he also used it. The love between sisters for each other. Paul, who had this memory, also burst into tears. But Kofei has to endure this pain every day. He felt that when kindness could do nothing, the wicked need to be treated by the wicked. The pervert was killed. The official second generation was also crazy. He was sent to a mental hospital. The prison has also returned to a rare calm. But this is only superficial. Because good people still have to endure the pain and injustice of the world. Kofei's execution day will be in a few days. Paul, who has learned the truth, can't bear the torture of conscience. But his inability to do anything was equally frustrating. God sent angels down to earth. Why did you kill him yourself? Before the execution, Paul and Kofei talked. Paul asked you if you need anything else and what you need to eat. In fact, what he wanted to ask was whether you want to go and whether you want me to let you go, but Kofei shook his head and said no. It turned out that Kofei was tired. He had been lonely for a long time. He was fed up with the disappointment brought by human nature and the pain of listening to the world. So if he could, he didn't want to be an angel anymore. Now death was a relief for him. Soon the time for execution came. Kofei was very relaxed and walked to the execution ground while telling jokes. No one liked to step on this green aisle, because the death row was executed, will step on this green road leading to death, but the ugliness of human nature and endless pain, let God's angel willingly chose this way to return to heaven. The execution ground was full of people. Kofei said that I could feel their hatred for me. The prison guard said we couldn't bear to let you go. Another prison guard also couldn't bear to be sad, and he had already burst into tears. Before execution, Kofei made a request that he ask the prison guard not to wear a head cover on him, because he was still afraid of the dark. Paul agreed. But when everything is ready. But he was unable to say the order of execution. Paul stepped forward and held Kofei's hand tightly. When he felt Kofei's extreme pain again, he reluctantly said that he would execute. When the current passed through Kofei's body, it seemed to pass through the heart of warning. They are all crying. With a burst of light bulb burst, the angel also completely left the world.